Meloni reveals a bombshell about the European Union. It was all a farce. The camera lights blazed mercilessly as she positioned herself at the podium, that characteristic enigmatic grin spread across her face. The same expression that had haunted European bureaucrats for countless sleepless nights. Giorgia Meloni, Italy's groundbreaking female prime minister, stood poised to detonate a political bomb that would reverberate across the continent. At 47, after years of strategic silence and complex diplomatic maneuvering, she was finally prepared to expose the hidden reality that had been lurking beneath the surface. A truth that everyone intuited, but none possessed the courage to articulate. Her forthcoming declaration would transcend mere newspaper headlines. It was strategically designed to tear apart the most closely guarded secrets of the European establishment and fundamentally reshape the continent's political landscape forever. To comprehend the magnitude of this explosive moment, we must journey back to the origins of Meloni's political evolution, to recall the era when a younger, more fiery Giorgia dominated opposition platforms across Italy. She didn't merely critique the European Union, she launched an all-out assault against its very existence. She branded it a supranational leviathan, a mechanism engineered to systematically consume national independence piece by piece. She emerged as the passionate voice of populist resistance, crying out against the authoritarianism of faceless, unaccountable elites. Yet something extraordinary occurred the instant she stepped into genuine positions of authority in 2022. The transformation was both immediate and bewildering to political observers worldwide. The woman who had previously characterized the EU as a bureaucratic dungeon was suddenly engaging in cordial handshakes with Ursula von der Leyen, beaming for media photographs and performing the role of the exemplary diplomatic pupil. Opposition voices immediately denounced her as a traitor to her principles. Loyal supporters nervously rationalized her behavior as political realism, but everyone was overlooking the grander strategy unfolding behind the scenes. What sinister revelations had Meloni uncovered behind those imposing, fortress-like doors in Brussels? What terrifying truths had she discovered that compelled her to dramatically alter her entire approach to European politics? The answer would only crystallize much later, when the perfect political tempest finally materialized. She hadn't been domesticated by the establishment machinery. Instead, she was systematically infiltrating it from within. While the European elites congratulated themselves on successfully co-opting her, Meloni was allegedly executing a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation, donning a mask of submission to meticulously document the institutional decay from the inside. The initial crack in this carefully constructed facade emerged not in Rome but in Paris. March 31st, 2025, marked the day when a French judicial decision sent seismic waves throughout the foundation of European political structures. Marine Le Pen, the woman who had dedicated decades to being the perpetual antagonist of the French establishment, faced conviction for embezzling European Union funds. The sentence was immediate, severe, and politically devastating. She lost her eligibility to hold public office for 5 years. To outside observers, this appeared to be straightforward legal accountability. However, to Giorgia Meloni, observing silently from the Palazzo Chigi, this represented something far more ominous, a calculated political assassination. For Meloni, this verdict transcended questions of financial mismanagement. It served as a signal, a warning flare launched into the darkness. It aligned perfectly with a disturbing pattern she had been monitoring for months. When news of the conviction reached Rome, something fundamental shifted within Meloni's political consciousness. For the first time since assuming her oath of office, her diplomatic composure began to fracture. Her public response was meticulously worded, yet beneath the careful diplomatic language, it pulsed with explosive implications. She discussed democracy under attack, a system that criminalizes political opposition, and millions of citizens being silenced through judicial manipulation. But her words contained a deeper, encrypted message that European insiders immediately recognized. Meloni wasn't simply defending Le Pen's rights. She was signaling her complete understanding of how the entire system had been rigged against political dissent. According to confidential sources within the Italian government apparatus, A dramatically different narrative was developing behind closed doors. While Meloni maintained her public diplomatic engagements in Brussels, she was allegedly functioning as a covert intelligence operative, systematically gathering compromising information on European Union operations. Reports indicate she maintained comprehensive, detailed documentation of every private meeting with EU officials. She recorded every subtle threat, every whisper of institutional coercion, and every attempt to manipulate national governments through economic pressure. She was constructing an extensive evidentiary file, documenting what she perceived as the European Union's transformation from a voluntary confederation of sovereign states into an authoritarian superstate obsessed with perpetuating its own dominance. The evidence her supporters claim she gathered was devastating in its implications, and the ongoing migration crisis provided the perfect laboratory for Brussels' emerging brand of sophisticated authoritarianism. Italy found itself isolated on the front lines of the Mediterranean migration routes, desperately appealing for genuine European solidarity. Rome demanded concrete solutions to an enormous humanitarian crisis that threatened to overwhelm its infrastructure and resources. Yet instead of meaningful assistance, Brussels delivered condescending lectures about moral obligations, while categorically refusing to distribute the overwhelming burden equitably among member states. When Meloni introduced innovative approaches such as establishing processing facilities in Albania, the response from the European Commission was allegedly one of dismissive ridicule and systematic bureaucratic obstruction. The pattern became horrifyingly clear to Meloni. Brussels had no genuine interest in resolving the crisis. They actively profited from the resulting chaos and instability, using it as justification to expand their centralized authority and control mechanisms. However, migration represented merely the surface of a much deeper institutional problem. The green energy transition, digital governance initiatives, demands for coordinated defense expenditures. Every major policy emanating from the Berlaymont headquarters carried identical implicit threats: conform to our demands or face severe consequences. Meloni observed as Brussels systematically ostracized Viktor Orban's Hungary, weaponizing European funding to strangle the Hungarian economy while simultaneously questioning the legitimacy of their democratic mandate. She witnessed their treatment of Poland when Warsaw dared to assert the constitutional supremacy of national law over European directives. The operational blueprint was unmistakable and thoroughly chilling in its implications. The critical turning point, the moment that truly radicalized Meloni's perspective, can be traced directly to Ursula von der Leyen's inflammatory remarks in the days preceding Italy's 2022 general elections. The Commission President had explicitly warned that if electoral outcomes went in an unacceptable direction, Brussels possessed sufficient tools to handle Italy exactly as they had managed Poland and Hungary. This represented institutional blackmail on an unprecedented scale in modern European history. The underlying message was unambiguous: elect our preferred candidates or face economic strangulation. However, von der Leyen's hubris led to a catastrophic miscalculation. She had inadvertently revealed the authoritarian nature of the European establishment to precisely the individual intelligent enough to remember every detail and patient enough to await the optimal moment for retaliation. As 2025 progressed, the European Union's polished exterior began deteriorating rapidly. Promises of economic recovery evaporated completely, leaving citizens struggling under crushing inflation and an unprecedented energy crisis. The ambitious Green Deal projects were either dramatically scaled back or abandoned entirely in panic-driven policy reversals. The emperor's nakedness was becoming increasingly apparent, and European voters were beginning to take notice. Meloni's strategic positioning throughout this turbulent period represented nothing short of a masterpiece in political warfare. She performed the role of compliant ally with absolute perfection, while secretly documenting every abuse of institutional power, every anti-democratic manipulation, and every betrayal of the fundamental values the European Union claimed to champion. She understood that her moment of reckoning was approaching inevitably. She recognized that eventually, the European establishment would overreach so egregiously that even their most devoted supporters would be compelled to confront the ugly reality of institutional corruption. Le Pen's conviction provided that catalytic moment. It was the spark that ignited the explosive device Meloni had been carefully assembling over 3 years of covert intelligence gathering. She had evolved beyond her role as a mere politician. She had transformed into a key witness for the prosecution in what would become the trial of the European Union's legitimacy. The scale of institutional manipulation she had allegedly documented was staggering. According to sources close to her inner circle, Meloni had accumulated evidence of systematic coordination between Brussels officials and national judicial systems, explicitly designed to eliminate political opposition through legal warfare rather than democratic competition. The documentation reportedly included recordings of Commission officials discussing strategies to remove inconvenient national leaders, internal memoranda regarding the weaponization of European funding based on political loyalty tests, and evidence of systematic interference in national electoral processes. This wasn't merely political gamesmanship, it represented a fundamental assault on the democratic principles that supposedly formed the foundation of the European project. Meloni's supporters claim she possessed irrefutable evidence of what amounted to a soft coup against democratic sovereignty, orchestrated by unelected bureaucrats who viewed national governments as obstacles to their centralized vision rather than legitimate expressions of popular will. The migration crisis had served as the perfect testing ground for these authoritarian tendencies, revealing Brussels' true priorities: power consolidation rather than problem-solving. When member states requested practical assistance with humanitarian challenges, they received ideological lectures. When they proposed innovative solutions, they faced bureaucratic sabotage. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. The European establishment had created a system where compliance with their political vision mattered more than democratic legitimacy, where judicial manipulation was preferred over electoral competition, and where national sovereignty was viewed as an antiquated obstacle to their technocratic utopia. Meloni's elaborate masquerade had reached its zenith by early 2025. To external observers, she appeared to have seamlessly integrated into the European establishment, participating in summit photographs and diplomatic ceremonies with apparent enthusiasm. However, according to intelligence sources within the Italian government, this public persona masked an unprecedented covert operation to expose institutional corruption at the highest levels of European governance. The sophistication of her alleged intelligence-gathering campaign was remarkable in its scope and execution. Sources suggest she maintained encrypted digital archives of every significant interaction with European officials, systematically categorizing instances of political coercion, economic manipulation, and judicial interference. Her documentation reportedly included time-stamped recordings of private conversations where Commission officials discussed strategies for removing democratically elected leaders who refused to conform to Brussels' political agenda. The most damaging evidence allegedly involved detailed records of how European funding mechanisms were weaponized to punish non-compliant member states. Internal communications supposedly revealed explicit discussions about using financial leverage to influence electoral outcomes and destabilize governments that prioritized national sovereignty over European integration. Meloni's supporters claim she possessed documented evidence of a systematic campaign to transform the European Union from a voluntary confederation into a centralized superstate, with democratic accountability sacrificed in favor of technocratic control. The alleged evidence included coordination protocols between Brussels and national judicial systems designed to criminalize political opposition through selective prosecution rather than democratic debate. The migration crisis had provided the perfect cover for this intelligence operation. While publicly advocating for European solidarity, Meloni was allegedly documenting how Brussels deliberately perpetuated humanitarian chaos to justify expanding centralized authority. Her sources reportedly revealed that European officials privately viewed the migration crisis not as a problem requiring solutions, but as an opportunity to accelerate political integration by overwhelming national governments' capacity to respond independently. The systematic isolation of Hungary and Poland served as case studies in Brussels' methodology. According to Meloni's alleged documentation, these weren't spontaneous responses to rule of law concerns, but calculated campaigns to demonstrate the consequences of challenging European orthodoxy. The message to other member states was clear: conform or face economic and political destruction. Von der Leyen's pre-election threats against Italy in 2022 had been the final piece of evidence Meloni required to complete her case. This wasn't diplomatic pressure. It represented explicit interference in democratic processes by unelected bureaucrats who viewed national sovereignty as an obstacle to their centralized vision. The timing of Le Pen's conviction provided the perfect catalyst for Meloni's revelations. The French court's decision perfectly illustrated the pattern she had been documenting: the systematic use of judicial mechanisms to eliminate political opposition. Le Pen's 5-year ban from public office wasn't legal accountability. It was political assassination disguised as judicial proceedings. Meloni's intelligence operation had allegedly uncovered the complete architecture of what she characterized as soft totalitarianism, a system that maintained democratic appearances while systematically undermining democratic substance. Elections were permitted, but only if they produced acceptable results. National governments could exist, but only if they functioned as administrative extensions of Brussels in will. The European establishment had created what Meloni's supporters describe as a sophisticated form of authoritarianism, one that operated through economic coercion, judicial manipulation, and bureaucratic obstruction rather than traditional military force. This system was far more insidious than conventional dictatorship because it maintained the illusion of democratic legitimacy while systematically eliminating genuine political choice. Her alleged documentation revealed how this system operated in practice. Inconvenient political leaders faced judicial investigations, non-compliant member states experienced funding cuts, and dissenting voices were marginalized through media manipulation and academic ostracism. The European project had evolved into a mechanism for protecting established elites from democratic accountability. The evidence Meloni claimed to possess wasn't merely political ammunition. It represented a comprehensive exposé of how democratic institutions could be subverted while maintaining democratic facades. Her 3-year intelligence operation had allegedly produced irrefutable proof that the European Union had metamorphosed from a peace project into a power project, where centralized control mattered more than democratic consent. According to sources close to her inner circle, Meloni had concluded that the European system was fundamentally unreformable. The institutional corruption wasn't accidental or temporary, it was structural and intentional. The European establishment had created a self-perpetuating system designed to eliminate challenges to their authority, while maintaining the appearance of democratic governance. Her supporters argue that Meloni's patient intelligence gathering had revealed the true nature of contemporary European governance, a sophisticated form of authoritarianism that operated through institutional capture rather than direct repression, where democratic forms were preserved while democratic substance was systematically eliminated. The moment of truth arrived with theatrical precision. Standing beneath the Italian tricolour in a packed auditorium in Rome, Meloni finally spoke the words that would reverberate across the European continent and beyond. The revelation, when it finally emerged, was devastating in its stark simplicity and profound in its implications for the future of European governance. Before an audience of journalists, politicians, and citizens, Meloni exposed what she claimed was irrefutable evidence of clandestine coordination between Brussels officials and national judicial authorities, explicitly designed to eliminate political adversaries through legal warfare rather than democratic competition. Her presentation methodically laid bare what she characterized as a systematic campaign to delegitimize any leader who dared question the European integration project. However, the most shocking element of her revelation was deeply personal. Meloni publicly confessed that her entire transformation from eurosceptic firebrand to seemingly compliant European ally had been an elaborate deception, a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation designed to document institutional corruption from within the system itself. Every handshake with von der Leyen, every diplomatic smile captured by photographers, every apparent compromise on European policy had been part of an extensive covert mission to build an irrefutable case against the Brussels establishment. She had performed the role of the converted populist with Academy Award-worthy precision, all while systematically gathering evidence that would ultimately expose the authoritarian nature of contemporary European governance. Meloni presented what she claimed was indisputable proof of institutional malfeasance: audio recordings of Commission officials discussing strategies to remove inconvenient national leaders, internal memoranda detailing the weaponization of European Union funding based on political loyalty assessments, and documentation of systematic interference in national democratic processes. The evidence allegedly revealed explicit discussions among European officials about using judicial mechanisms to criminalize political opposition, transforming courts from arbiters of legal disputes into weapons of political warfare. The sophistication of this system, according to Meloni's presentation, was both impressive and terrifying in its implications for democratic governance. Ursula von der Leyen's office immediately shifted into crisis management mode, issuing desperate statements about respect for rule of law and dismissing Meloni's allegations as populist propaganda. However, the institutional damage was immediate and potentially irreversible. Meloni hadn't simply called for European reform or even Italian withdrawal. She had declared the moral and democratic death of the European Union as currently constituted. Her argument was devastatingly simple yet profound. The institution had become fundamentally unreformable, having transformed into a sophisticated system designed to punish democratic dissent while protecting unelected elites from accountability. The battle for genuine democracy, she concluded, would not be won within European Parliament chambers, but in national capitals where popular sovereignty could still be meaningfully exercised. The presentation included specific examples of how this system operated in practice. When Viktor Orbán's Hungary enacted policies reflecting the will of Hungarian voters, Brussels responded with economic warfare disguised as rule of law concerns. When Poland asserted constitutional supremacy over European directives, they faced coordinated pressure designed to force governmental collapse. When Marine Le Pen challenged European orthodoxy through electoral competition, she found herself facing judicial persecution that conveniently removed her from political life. Meloni's most damaging allegation involved von der Leyen's pre-election threats against Italy in 2022. According to her documentation, these weren't isolated diplomatic missteps, but examples of systematic electoral interference by unelected bureaucrats who viewed national democracy as an obstacle to their centralized vision. The broader implications of Meloni's revelations extended far beyond immediate political controversy. If her allegations proved accurate, they represented evidence of the most sophisticated assault on democratic governance in European history, a system that maintained democratic appearances while systematically undermining democratic substance through institutional capture and judicial manipulation. Her supporters argued that Meloni had accomplished something unprecedented in modern European politics. She had infiltrated the establishment's inner sanctum and returned with documentary evidence of its authoritarian transformation. Like a modern-day Trojan horse, she had gained access to the corridors of power while maintaining her true mission of exposing institutional corruption. The response from European capitals was immediate and revealing. While official statements condemned Meloni's allegations as destabilizing populist rhetoric, private communications allegedly revealed significant concern about the potential authenticity of her evidence. Several member state governments reportedly requested confidential briefings about the allegations, suggesting that Meloni's claims had touched a nerve within the European establishment. Giorgia Meloni had entered what she characterized as the belly of the beast and emerged with the only weapon capable of destroying it: documented truth about the authoritarian transformation of European institutions. Whether her allegations would ultimately transform European governance or merely generate temporary political turbulence remained to be seen. But the explosive nature of her revelations had already fundamentally altered the continental political landscape. The woman who had once been dismissed as a populist firebrand had potentially delivered the most devastating exposé of institutional corruption in European history, suggesting that the battle for democratic governance was far from over, and that the true nature of European power structures was darker than most citizens had imagined.